Jeff Sutherland didn't like those things around his neck either. So he found a lapel mic online that would work. Am I been in the right place? Well, good evening. Tonight we're going to be looking primarily at Ecclesiastes 7, and maybe we'll flip far enough into Ecclesiastes 8. I have 7 pages of additional notes on the slides for tonight of other scriptures that support the things we're going to talk about. And so if we get to some point and have some time left, I will dodge back into a couple of pages of these notes here, some of the scriptures that I would like to reference instead of having so many of them. There's so many dovetails in the book of Ecclesiastes with Psalms and Proverbs, as well as even some of Jesus' teaching. We'll look at one of those in particular tonight. So as we approach this first and he would go downstairs, wouldn't he? Not putting anything out. Hang on. Okay. Let's try it.
Be gentle.
I'll try. And to that, my wife would say, yes, you're very trying. Thanks, Brian. A good name is better than fine perfume. He said that. Isn't a name a big deal? You know, let's go back to where we were. The day of death is better than the day of birth. How do you figure that? Why is dying being better than being born? Yeah. Yeah, when you're born, you got a lot of challenges ahead of you. And one who dies in the Lord, there's a whole lot more to look forward to than. But a man that has not maintained a good name or has a bad reputation, there's a certain amount of sadness in that. And I've said, as probably every preacher for all time has said, it's a whole lot easier to do a memorial service for a Christian than it is somebody who had no relationship with God. That there's no connection to, no guarantee of eternity in a pleasant place. And that's a challenge. And those of us who've done memorial services for those kind of settings, it's a challenge. But he says there that death is the destiny of every man, and the living should take it to heart. But that other thing he says in this line, it's better to go to the house of mourning than to the house of feasting or pleasure. Why so? Okay? We live in a very self-indulgent society, don't we? If not, you wouldn't find so many bars and casinos in this town if that wasn't the case, of people seeking entertainment. Why is it that you go to a basketball game or a football game and the ground level seats or the first row are the most desirable? And why isn't it that way at church? There is something to that. But isn't he just saying it's better in the sense of to contemplate where you are and what you're doing with your life, in that sense, in the time of mourning or time of reflection, than to just be somebody who's only driven to seek pleasure. We know that we have every reason to be joyful in our Christianity and our walk with God. But that needs to be the result of our contemplation of being with God, being sober enough in our activities and our choices, and taking those kinds of things to heart. This thing of having a good name, you go to Proverbs 22:1. A good name is more desirable than great riches, to be esteemed better than silver or gold. Now, there's a few of us in here that was at the memorial service for Lynn on Monday. And probably of all the dozens of memorial services that I've been to or officiated over, I've never seen a family who participated so well with what they had to say, and they said it so well. Really brought honor to Lynn's name. That was a real compliment to see how much that grandpa was loved by his grandchildren. A real tribute to him. And that has to be a great comfort to Pat as she makes the adjustments. So a good name is so important. And something that I heard time and time again as I would start to leave the house on a Friday or Saturday night to go to Bozeman, to go to a basketball game or a football game, the words that my dad said to me over and over again, remember who you are. Remember who you are. And that really meant something to me. And I knew that I wanted my dad's name respected. I respected my father. And some of my choices not to do certain things were not necessarily based upon my own code of ethic, but the one that he was trying to impress upon me is the right thing to do. And I'm thankful for that. And I think there's many of you too have changed that remember who you are to remember whose you are. You know, it's not just your family name, but you're a child of God. You carry that name Christian too. And there are people who love to find fault with Christians, aren't there? I had a grandfather who never became a Christian because he said there was hypocrites in the church. Well, duh. There's hypocrites everywhere. But at least these people were in a situation where they could reflect and change their behaviors instead of somebody who's away from God. We know that there's none of us that are without sin. So he goes on to say the fact that its sorrow is better than laughter because a sad face is good for the heart. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of the fools is in the house of pleasure. Really, truly, comparing a heart of a fool with a heart of wisdom, which is going to get you the best result. And those who just seek pleasure in their lives, and that little paragraph that I stuck up there, that life is not a party, as some would like to think and pursue. There is a place for pleasure and enjoyment, but sober, thoughtful living in preparation for eternity should be the high calling of our lives. Oh, there's going to be and should be times where we really enjoy some situations and dynamics, but not those that take away from the values that we should be living for as Christians. To make sure we do things in ways that bring honor and glory to the name of God, not just our family name. There was a quote that I found of Adam Clarke's. He said, "A wise man loves those occasions from which he can derive spiritual advantage." Putting yourselves in situations where it will encourage you to grow your spiritual life. And a wise man loves those occasions where he can be fed or where he can nurture it. And we all need to be people who look for that. He goes on to say, and therefore prefers visiting the sick and sympathizing with those who have suffered, I can't even read that small print, privations by death. But the fool, the gay, the thoughtless, the giddy prefers places and times of diversion and amusement. Here he is prevented from seriously consider either himself or the latter end, the grand fault and misfortune of youth. Now that statement up there, but the fool, the gay, the thoughtless. The gay there is not what the common slang for homosexuality. That's not the implication. It's that the gay, they hijacked a really good word. And I have a sister that you all know that certainly resents that. People that are gay should be an indication of people that are happy. And that's what he's addressing there. It's an old quote. So what do you listen to? Remember back in I guess probably the first computer I got was in the 80s. And I remember the expression then was garbage in, garbage out. Whatever you put in there, you got. But isn't that true here too? If you want to just imbibe, soak yourself up with garbage, you're going to get garbage out, and it's going to come back in. Now, There are some people who remember a lot of things that probably shouldn't be remembered, huh, Mike? Never play trivia with him, because he can remember things that I've told him for years he needed a filter on his memory, because he can remember things that most of us wouldn't. I don't know why it sticks there, but it does, and it's a sign of a good mind. But you need to make sure you're also programming yourself with things that are worth remembering, don't you? I remember a lady from Sioux Falls, South Dakota, back in the 70s, that was so amazed at Ted Kell and his ability to quote. And he couldn't start Genesis 1:1 and go all the way through the Bible. However, if you gave him a topic anywhere and anything, he could quote those verses in the entire Bible. Or he could quote from a book or a commentary or an author that he had read sometime before, and it seemed almost phony. We had him on some question and answer. People called in questions, and he would answer Bible questions on live TV. They thought it was staged. No, he just had that kind of a mind. And I remember this one lady walked up to him with the campaign for Christ we did in Bozeman in 1976, and she said, "Brother Kell, I'd give half my life if I could quote the scriptures like you can." And Ted's son said that's about what it took for my dad to memorize it. About half his life. He'd get up early in the morning and work on memorization for a lifetime. And I have an idea that's playing out well in his life right now, because he lost most of his sight. But to have that kind of memory is pretty special. Ephesians 7, verse 5 and 6, it is better to heed a wise man's rebuke than to listen to the song of fools. Like the crackling of thorns under the pot, so is the laughter of fools. This too is meaningless. We live in a country and a time when many of us have spent time around campfires and know that there's certain woods or certain bark or whatnot. Maybe it's the pitch, the tar of a tree that will pop and crackle and come out. It doesn't really contribute to the heat factor, except it does put the sparks and the noise out, sometimes frightening. And so he says that it's better to heed the wise man's rebuke than to listen to the song of fools. There's a lot of things that are not worth listening to. Usually the evening news. It's so seldom you hear something that's really encouraging and uplifting. But taking those things to heart and realizing that sorrow or contemplation is a whole lot better than just finding ways to amuse yourself. There's a lot of passages that support such thoughts. Hebrews 12:5 says, "And you've forgotten the word of encouragement that addresses you as sons. My son, do not make light of the Lord's discipline. Do not lose heart when he rebukes you." There's also Proverbs that talk about that a wise son heeds his father's instruction, but a mocker will not listen. We need to listen, and we need to seek the advice of people that are wiser or experienced, that will help guide us instead of one of the things I remember my dad saying over and over again in my lifetime. There's no fool like an old fool. And there's some people that practice foolishness their whole lives and do foolish things. So what the teacher of Ecclesiastes, the preacher, if Solomon is trying to get to us, is the fact that we need to be wise enough to look for the good things and not just camp out on those things that are destructive. But Jesus said it this way. Matthew 15, "Don't you see that whatever enters the mouth goes into the stomach, and then it comes out of the body? But the things that come out of the mouth come from the heart, and these make a man unclean. For out of the heart comes evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false testimony, slander. These are what makes a person these are what make a man unclean, but eating with unwashed hands does not make him unclean. So, what can cause us not to look for wise counsel? Have you ever looked for somebody who could be an ally with the way you felt, instead of looking for somebody who would tell you the truth about what you were doing? That's natural for us to rally some people, our allies, to try to see things in our viewpoint. Now, it's okay to be persuaded if toward a good thing. But if you just look for those who are foolish to advise, and the things that we put into our heads, we can change things up. There's two words that really say a lot that we need to look at constantly in our own hearts. And that's when we start justifying and rationalizing. We can really convince ourselves of some things and be led away. Paul talks about it in one of his letters to the Thessalonians about some people will receive a strong delusion. It's just not good thinking. And we see this in a lot of our behaviors in our culture today. I just find it amazing that some of the things that are defended, some of the causes, even some as they appeal today to the Supreme Court for the rights of the unborn. To me, that's unfathomable. That's an unfathomable dilemma that people with a straight face would want to take the life of a precious baby. And but wisdom seeking that spiritual advantage is a whole lot more to it. The follies of a fool are patience. Which do you think is the most advantageous to you? I think without doubt we've all done some foolish things in our life, and maybe still do. But how much wiser to understand the real meaning and the real values of things. And so he says in verse 7, extortion turns a wise man into a fool, and a bribe corrupts the heart. The end of the matter is better than the beginning, and patience is better than pride. Do not be quickly provoked in your spirit, for anger resides in the lap of fools. Do not say, why were the old days better than these? For it is not wise to ask such questions. Man, we could spend some time talking about that application, couldn't we? But that thing up there, that patience is better than pride. Are there very many things that we do in foolish ways or foolish choices, or even foolish things that we talk about that doesn't involve pride? What is it that goes before the fall? A haughty spirit or pride? You know, we can certainly get ourselves in trouble when we set ourselves up above other people. Way back 30-some years ago when I was playing golf one day with an old friend, well, there was 4 of us that played a lot of golf together. We'd pair off in pairs, and it was a competition. Yeah, we played for money. We played for a quarter, and at the end of the year, we divided the quarters back. But it was the bragging rights for the week, and one par 3 hole in the Glendive golf course, an uphill shot of about 135 yards, and I missed the green. And my playing partner, Joe, was upset at me. And he said, if I couldn't do better than that, I'd go back to the clubhouse. And I said, well, you're up. And he muffed his ball worse than mine. And everybody turned and looked at him, and Joe went and got in his golf cart and drove to the clubhouse. He came back in about 5 minutes. We had a big laugh. But isn't it pride goes before the fall? You know, you need to be careful what you say. What did, maybe only, this is not in my notes, but I just thought about it. King Ahab, maybe the only wise thing he ever said, he wasn't good at picking women, you know that, and he got in a lot of trouble. But when he was challenged to go to war against an evil king, you remember what he said? You remember what Ahab said? I'm going to paraphrase it. He said a guy should boast when he's taking his armor off, not when he's putting it on. So many times, if you boast that you're going to be able to do something, that pride, chances are you're going to be defeated. And while Ahab, he didn't always demonstrate very good judgment, especially trying to keep his wife in order, that the follies of a fool can really destroy one. And this thing about why do we say the old days were better? Or we remember what we want to remember. And that's one of the things of distorted thinking that drug addicts and alcoholics get into. And that's a common thing that when I was working in that part of that life in the District 2 alcohol and drug program in eastern Montana, that you could see people as they justified their behaviors. It's called euphoric recall. They only remember the best times. They don't remember all the times they stumble and fall or throw up or get sick or crash their cars or do all those other things, but they remember the good times, or at least what they thought were good times. And that euphoric recall, it can really deceive you as you live your life. The old days weren't always better. I was on a moose hunting trip in 1971 in Canada. We rented a cabin from a member of the church that didn't tell us that it didn't have a heat source inside that uninsulated cabin at the end of Chetic Lake. And it was just covered on the outside with T111 paneling. And it never got anywhere near zero. It stayed 25, 30 below and the wind blowing all the time. And the four of us just froze to death. It did have a little cook stove, but you could probably set on the burner and not got, because it was so cold. And that meant we had no running water. That meant the outhouse 50 yards away was really inconvenient. And I remember Herb coming back in there one night from the outhouse. And he says, the next man that talks to me about the good old days, I'm going to hit him. You know, sometimes we don't recall things the way they need to be remembered, the whole picture. I'm glad we have euphoric recall about good things. I'm glad for good memories. We shared some of those Monday about Lynn. God equipped us with those kinds of memories. Mike? Yeah, they only remembered how soon they forgot the abuse that they were taking at the hands of the Egyptians. And there they were out there. And then pretty soon, as God fed them and watered them, they started complaining about having the same diet every day. And I think some of us would probably identify with that. We're so spoiled at having pantries full of choices. You know, Steve? The end should be better. The end of a life should be better for those who die in the Lord. The patience that it takes is better than pride. Pride is a horrible thing. We all have it. We all struggle with it at times. The foolish anger, the old days. But let's move on. Verse 11 and 12. Wisdom, like an inheritance, is a good thing and benefits those who see the sun. Wisdom is a shelter as money is a shelter. But the advantage of knowledge is this, that wisdom preserves the life of its possessor. He compares wisdom to inheritance, to like money is a shelter. How's money a shelter? In 1977, we had a door knocking effort over in Anaconda, Montana. Dad was preaching there at the time. And I had a little motorhome, and I went over there. In fact, Ted Kell, the man with the memory, he was there. So it was my dad, Ted Kell, and my brother and I knocked doors in that town of Anaconda, which is a tough town. We never got in a door. We got dogs turned loose. But before I left, I did something. I folded a $100 bill and stuck it in my billfold in case I needed. That's when gas was 37 cents a gallon. A $100 bill on a motorhome would go a long ways. That was a brand new 1977 $100 bill. You know what? In the 40-some years, I never had to spend it. I always found another way around it, but it's always been my ace in the hole. If I really needed it, it's there. And isn't it funny how we think like that, or at least how I felt like that? And if I would have put that in the bank back when the interest rates were paying, it would have been better served. But in the meantime, after carrying it this long, who cares? And that $100 today is probably more like a $2 bill today. But money is somewhat of a shelter if you know that if you have something to back up or something to buy your needs with. It goes back to that verse we quoted in Proverbs several times in the last 7 weeks. That neither give me too much or too little, so I don't deny God. Just give us enough to get by with. And so wisdom as an inheritance, as a shelter, and as a life preserver. I think so many times of my dad's wisdom that he made me make him some promises. When I headed off to college, he said, "Son, you're going to be one of the boys in that dormitory among many that do not have a car. I want you to promise me you'll never loan your car out. Never." And he saw me thinking for a moment. And he said, "I know what you're thinking. It's your car. You should be able to choose what you do. But I want you to promise me this." There was another boy showed up to college from Missouri. It had the most wonderful 64 Nova, 4-speed 283. Neatest little car, and he loaned it to a boy one night for a date. And it came back banged up. And I thought to myself, my dad was smart. That he made me promise him something, even though it was my car and I'd bought it. Dad saved me some heartache. And sometimes we need to listen to the advice of others, of knowing that there are some things there to learn from. But also, wisdom being a life preserver. That's a neat thought, isn't it? Let's go. So verses 13 and 14. Consider what God has done. Who can straighten out what he's made crooked? When times are good, be happy. But when times are bad, consider. God has made one as well as the other. Therefore, man cannot discover anything about his future. So when times are good, enjoy the moment. But there's some bad things going to happen in your lives too. And that's when he says, consider these things. God has made the one as well as the other. So when there's problems going on in your life or tragedies take place, a lot of people turn and blame God. But a better thing would be to consider what God's trying to teach you in whatever you're going through at the moment. And it may be uncomfortable. He does not promise Christians easy street. And so we need to consider that God made the one as well as the other. Therefore, a man cannot discover anything about his future. We don't know about our future, do we? And we need to know that it's inevitable, that it's appointed once for man to die, and then the judgment. And so what he's really telling us, keep things in perspective. We sometimes use that expression or know that expression, this too will pass. Either that or you will. And we expect things to improve, don't we? When you've got the 12-hour flu bug and you're barfing your brains out, you can't imagine it passing, can you? But it's amazing how a day or two later, it's as if it's a bad memory. But accepting things, the good as the bad, God made one as well as the other, and that we need to keep those kind of things in perspective in our lives. And so let's talk about the wisdom of some good priorities as given by Jesus. Jesus said, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, about your body, what you will wear. Life is more than food and body more than clothes. Consider the ravens. And then on down, who of you would worry? Can you add an hour to your life? Can you do anything really? What you need to do is take good advantage of the time you have and use it wisely and not worry about the things that you have no control over. And he goes on in the next, consider how the lilies or the birds of the field, God takes care of them. And that verse 31, but seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. They're going to be given to you. Verse 15, in this meaningless life of mine, I have seen both of these, a righteous man perishing in his righteousness, and a wicked man living long in his wickedness. And I mentioned it before, but go back and read Psalms 37 and Psalm 73, one by Asaph, the other by David, talking about how worldly people seem to have all the, quote, luck. They seem to be wealthy and charmed and happy and have all these things. And David in Psalm 73 says, it's only when I went to the house of the Lord did I see it through his eyes, did I see them through the eyes of God, that they were empty and shallow, and that's all they had in their lives. And we should want and desire more than that in our lives as well. Do not be over righteous, neither over wise. Why destroy yourself? Do not be over wicked, and do not be a fool. Why die before your time? It is good to grasp the one and not let go of the other. Man who fears God will avoid all extremes. Wisdom makes one wise, more powerful than 10 rulers in a city. There is not a righteous man on earth who does what is right and never sins. And I've got in parentheses there, 1 John 1:8. We're not going to look at it, but it's there. Do not pay attention to every word people say, or you may hear your servant cursing you. For you know in your heart that many times you yourself has cursed others. Yep. He called it, didn't he? It's really easy to see it in everybody else without seeing ourselves. Kenny would remember, there was an old Dutch woman in the Bozeman church when he and I grew up over there, and her name was what, Ken? Beekman. I don't know if she ever had a first name. She was just known as Beekman, old Dutch lady. And my dad would often preach with his big old hands, and he would often use his finger. He tried to break that habit because Beekman would always come to the back of the auditorium and take my dad's hands and says, "You need to quit pointing yourself when you realize you got all those pointing back at you." She said, "You need to be doing it this way." She was a delightful old lady, and I'm surprised you forgot her name. So, but how old? Can you imagine him and I growing up together? Can you imagine us being young once? That was a long time ago. But I think, oops, did the other one not come into that? Something missing there. Oh, well. All this I tested by wisdom, and I said, I am determined to be wise. But this was beyond me. And remember, he'd asked for wisdom, and God granted it to him. But he's still digging. He doesn't think he's arrived. You know that old cliche, when you're green, you're growing, and when you're ripe, you're rotten? Don't think you ever have it made, that it's there all the time. Because whatever wisdom may be, it is far off and most profound. Who can discover it? So I turned my mind to understand, to investigate, and to search out wisdom and the schemes of things, and to understanding the stupidity of wickedness and the madness of folly. I think that's a great translation. The wickedness of stupidity and the madness of folly. So they're going to ring the bell. Let's look at these last 4 verses. I find it more better than death, the woman who is a snare, whose heart is a trap and whose hands are chains. The man who pleases God will escape her, but the sinner she will ensnare. Look, says the teacher, this is what I have discovered, adding one thing to another to discover the scheme of things. While I was still searching but not finding, I found one upright man among 1,000. But here, ladies, you can get upset at him for this, but I'll read it anyway. But he didn't find one woman. But remember, he wasn't real good about this woman thing. He's the guy that had 300 wives and 700 concubines. And, yeah. So verse 29 says, this only I found, God made mankind upright, but men have gone in search of many schemes. How true it is. That we tend to be foolish by nature and not take advantage of God. He had his statement there about women. We could probably have some debates about that, but we're not going to. But I'll tell you what. When I was 14 years old, I was a janitor at the Learner's Dress Shop, Bozeman, Montana. And after school, I would go and mop floors and sort hangers, and one of those mean managers would make me go out there in that display island that you came into the store, but there was an island out front, all covered by glass. And that was the lingerie and underwear. And that gal would make me go out there and dress those at mannequins just so they could giggle at me. And I would tend to agree there wasn't a good woman in that place working, I'll tell you. I learned some bad things about women when I worked there. Thank you all. Then remember, next week will be the second week, so we won't have classes next week. All right. Yeah, be the church. What is the other thing? Be a blessing. I can't get that in my head. Okay, good night.